Hope I don't forget. I'm going to start with the GST mini
Oh
holiday.
my God.
Yeah. Well,
What a disaster.
well, it certainly has proven to be that way, especially with, as I alluded to right at the top of the show, with the former finance minister saying, "Hey, guess what? It was a political gimmick that we couldn't afford." I mean, that's hardly a ringing endorsement from their
Duh.
own party.
But
Yeah.
I got really upset on Monday when she said that because I actually went to Senate to squash Bill C-78, which gave us the GST holiday.
Hmm.
She
Yes.
sponsored only to realize that she was against her own bill.
That seriously though, that is one of those you can't make this stuff up. But wait till you hear the Goofy Award later. By the way,
I know.
because it's astounding. But the bottom line is that we talk about a case of over promising and under delivering, because you guys did the numbers, you crunched the numbers. Okay, well, what are we going to save? Because I think it was playing on the fact that most Canadians maybe weren't as conscious of the fact that they're not paying GST on most groceries
Not a whole
anyways.
lot. No, no, not a lot. It's $4.51 retail for 2 months per Canadian.
I think for
Uh,
most consumers, if you look over the last few years, really number one concern has been cost of living, but topping that list has been the cost of food. We've been very fortunate over these years to be able to have a chance to talk to Sylvain Charlebois. He's the director of the Dalhousie Food Analytics Lab. This is sort of the go-to place when people want to find out what's gone on. In fact, they just produced their latest report, the Canada Food Report. They do it with the University of Guelph, the University of British Columbia, Saskatchewan. So it's the one that everybody comes back, refers to, etc. So I'm so pleased to welcome back to the show Sylvain Charlebois, the director.
oh,
Sylvain,
well, thank you for
thanks
having
first of
me,
all.
Mike.
Well, it's great to have you. Let's just get to the bottom line that people always are concerned with the Dalhousie Food Report, the Canada Food Report. What am I going to pay? What does it look like going forward? You guys have had a very good track record on forecasting the kind of rises. I think StatsCan told me it was about 17.6% since 2021. And you guys have been on top of that. So what am I looking forward to in the next year?
Yeah, so in the last 10 years, we've been wrong once. And that was in 2017 during Trump's first year, if you remember. We
Yeah.
actually did overestimated inflation because we felt that the tariff rhetoric was actually going to become policy.
Yes.
But now, of course, we're into almost into 2025. We're going through the same thing all over again. And as a group, we're about 30 scholars, and we've decided to not take tariffs too seriously, at least from an agri-food perspective, because you understand, Mike, 25% in food is a lot.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's immense. So we did put that aside, but for 2025 we are expecting the average family of four in Canada to pay about $800 more for the same food basket as if you were to buy the ideal food basket that you did in 2024. So that's 3 to 5%. So add all provinces east of Ontario, it's closer to 5, but
Wow.
everything west, including Ontario, we're closer to 3%. So it's certainly good news for people in British Columbia, but still 3% is above average.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the mistakes that I read in a lot of analysis is that the inflation rate is an increase. So, for example, when we got the November rate at 1.9%, a lot of people interpret that, oh, gee, prices are down. No, they're not. They're just going up slower. So, again, with food top of everyone's list, the current rate to continue to go up, but maybe not as fast. But the thing, Sylvain, that bothers me is that it impacts different categories of income differently. For example, if I'm low income, I'm spending a heck of a lot more, a greater percentage of my income on food and other necessities, would be food, shelter, gas, for example. So, yeah, the rate sounds maybe more bearable, but it's still more onerous for lower income people.
Oh, absolutely. The challenge, Mike, is that a lot of families, especially the middle class, really faced a perfect storm.
Hmm.
Uh, they were showing up at the grocery store with less money in their pockets, essentially. If you look at the data around interest rate payments in Canada in 2024, Canadians were paying for about $200 billion worth of interest rates on mortgages and debt. 2 years ago, it was half that. So all that money is going to banks, not for shelter, not for food, to banks.
Yeah.
But now we're hearing from the Bank of Canada that the bank's benchmark is actually dropping, and that's going to be helpful for Canadians. One thing. The other thing that we've noticed in 2024 is that wage increases have actually outpaced inflation for the first time in a few years. So that's going to help. So 2025 is likely going to be easier for a lot of people to manage compared to 2024. But still, you're right. Food prices are still going up, and that's going to be driven by two categories: meat products and vegetables. And vegetables, the reason, of course, is the mighty dollar.
Yeah, I was going to come right to that. When people say, I mean, we chat a lot about the weak dollar and how many inputs it has, and the impact on individuals. But yeah, one of the first things that comes to mind is, are you going to travel to the States? You'll know that right away. And fruits and vegetables during winter.
Yeah.
So can we just sit there and sort of get, if nothing else changed, we probably have about a 7-8% increase in those prices because the Canadian dollar fell that much over the last several months.
Exactly. And we're expecting a weaker dollar going into 2025. There's a bit of a issue with our world, really. If you look at the world economy, Canada is not doing well compared to the U.S., but so is Germany and France and Asia.
Yeah.
I mean, so the American currency is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and so that's why the Americans are in a very good position and to import anything, and we import for well over $30 billion worth of food in Canada every year, only from the U.S., just from the U.S. So that $30 billion is going to cost us more in 2025.
There's so many other issues too I want to get to, but I want to just ask you, I know it's a broad question and you can roll your eyes at me, but what do you think the biggest, but food, you're talking about, what are the categories that have dominated the news that people care about? I would say food, energy, and housing, and for the very reasons you're alluding to, because of the press on our own, cost of living. But
Yeah.
what do you think the biggest myths are? I mean, you are full fledged in the public debate. You're in front of the Parliament building, a legislature, and House of Commons. All of those things. What do you, when you walk away, do you shake your head and go, "Boy, these guys don't get it"? So, what comes to mind when I say what's the biggest myth when it comes to our grocery prices?
That's a really good question, Mike. And frankly, I think I've never gotten that question before. But so a couple of weeks ago, when I was at Senate testifying along with David Dodge, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, about the GST holiday, I did explain to senators that really food inflation is a problem. Higher prices are a problem. The worst problem, though, is price volatility. Because when prices go like this, that's even more hurtful than when prices go like this.
Why? And why is that?
Because you're basically pushing consumers away from really desirable categories like produce, like meat products, and those are the most volatile categories at the grocery store. And you want Canadians to actually eat more of these products. But when this happens, they walk away for a long time and perhaps permanently. And that's really the big problem. And that's why I've always been a big fan of the Grocer Code of Conduct, which was endorsed in 2024 by all 5 major grocers, which is good news. Now, will it work? I don't know, but it will be implemented in 2025. And my guess, based on the research that we've done, it will actually lessen the volatility that consumers will be exposed to, and you'll see a more consistent food inflation rate that will be manageable for everyone once they go to the grocery store.
What's in that code of conduct that produces that positive result? I mean, what's changed then? They've signed on. I know that you've written at Food Professor about, everybody signs on, your podcast, et cetera. But what's the actual kind of element of it that will produce the positive result?
So the one thing that most people don't know about the agri-food sector is that you have to pay your customer to sell food to them. So if Loblaw deals with PepsiCo or
Mhm.
PepsiCo deals with Loblaw, Pepsi has to pay Loblaw before selling a bag of chips
Yeah.
or soda, anything. So every year, say Loblaw will say, pay me $5 million and I'll carry your Lay's chips. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, the following year, they look at sales and they say, wow, people love those chips. Well, Loblaw may say, you know what, this year we're going to charge you 6 million or 7 million. Okay. What do you think Pepsi is going to do? Pepsi is going to increase its prices.
Yeah.
And so that brings more volatility to the market. The code of conduct will create a secretariat for Pepsi to go to dispute any increases in fees. That's the game that nobody sees. Consumers don't
Yes.
see that black box game, but it eventually hits them very hard. Very hard. And so that's why sometimes you see a lot of prices go like this. And as an observer myself, when I walk into a grocery store and I see a product go up, I don't know, 5% in a month, I know what happened. A new contract came to
Yeah.
town and prices were adjusted.
And now they've all signed on though to that, so they'll have a body to go to dispute those kind of
As long as
changes.
it's enforced properly. That's
Mhm.
the deal here that I'm
Oh,
concerned about, whether or not this code will have teeth. Do you think that Walmart will pay a fine? Do you think that Loblaw will pay a fine if they're not in compliance?
hmm hmm
I don't know.
Well, well, I know one thing I can recommend. They'll go to a food professor because you'll be talking about it and letting us know.
Absolutely. I'll be getting letters from vendors who are upset with Loblaw and Walmart for sure.
Let me talk about one other aspect that has been a theme on Money Talks. Is that we've been very concerned about the incredible use of food banks. The increased use, I should say. The explosive change in that. And it's that, but I know you've been writing parallel in that, talking about food insecurity. And I know you've said it's maybe the top issue in the country right now. So I want you to elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, so every year we actually release our top 10 list of food stories of the year. And it's once in a while it's not easy to find the number one story, I'll
hmm
be honest with you, but this year it wasn't hard. I mean, in 2024, every couple of months we saw a report coming from food banks somewhere in the
Yeah.
country, whether it's from the Greater Vancouver Food Bank, and I know David Long there. He's just, his team is just fabulous. But every now and then we were reminded of how many Canadians were actually visiting food banks every month. Over 2 million people. What's the population of Vancouver?
Yeah.
It's close. I mean, that's
Yeah.
Vancouver
You're
basically
putting the
going
whole
to.
the whole greater Lower Mainland in that
I
one
know.
number. Yeah.
That's a lot of people. And
Yeah.
so and there's also the emergence of the working poor. These people aren't just not doing anything. Some of them actually are working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and they still need to go to food banks. So and that's really a symptom of a much greater problem. It's not just
Yeah.
because of food prices. There's a lot going on there, and I'm hoping that in 2025 we'll start thinking about more progressive programs to. I mean, food banks won't disappear, but we can't really have 2 million people go to food banks every month. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah. Well, again, one of my issues has been how that group of people has been forgotten. I felt they were forgotten during COVID, when we said we're all in the same boat, and I constantly said not a chance. There's a huge divergence here. I guess all this talk about from the government side, oh, the economy's fine. It's not fine.
No,
I had an economist actually say to me, "Oh, I guess it won't be a hard landing." I said, "Well, where have you been? Because it's been a hard landing for millions of Canadians. We're
I know.
already on the landing part, and
And
that
if
wasn't
I may,
unusual."
Mike, I do want to make one comment, and this is something I've seen a lot on social media over the last several months. A lot of people out there think that people go to food banks, but they don't really need to go
Oh,
there. They just go there because they're basically profiteering. They're
yeah,
taking advantage of the system. hold on a second. Okay, we work with Food Banks Canada. We've worked with many food banks around the country. These people are diligent. If someone actually goes to food bank, okay, goes to a food bank, it's because they do qualify and they need it. I wanted to
Yeah.
make sure that people understand that.
I'm glad you're making that point. Let me move on to a couple of other things because there's so many things in the whole food side of things right now. You just alluded to a couple things. I hope I don't forget. I'm going to start with the GST mini
Oh
holiday.
my God.
Yeah. Well,
What a disaster.
well, it certainly has proven to be that way, especially with, as I alluded to right at the top of the show, with the former finance minister saying, "Hey, guess what? It was a political gimmick that we couldn't afford." I mean, that's hardly a ringing endorsement from their
Duh.
own party.
But
Yeah.
I got really upset on Monday when she said that because I actually went to Senate to squash Bill C-78, which gave us the GST holiday.
Hmm.
She
Yes.
sponsored only to realize that she was against her own bill.
That seriously though, that is one of those you can't make this stuff up. But wait till you hear the Goofy Award later, by the way,
I know.
because it's astounding. But the bottom line is that we talk about a case of over promising and under delivering because you guys did the numbers, you crunched the numbers. Okay, well, what are we going to save? Because I think it was playing on the fact that most Canadians maybe weren't as conscious of the fact that they're not paying GST on most groceries
Not a whole
anyways.
lot. No, no, not at all. It's $4.51 retail for 2 months per Canadian. But in food service, savings are much more substantial because everything is taxed, of
Yes.
course, at the restaurant. So the average, we actually calculate that the average Canadian would save anywhere between $60 to $90 over 2 months, especially because it's the holidays. A lot of people actually
Yes.
do go out, so there are savings there, but. The concern that I have, Mike, is opportunity pricing. You see,
Hmm.
taxes will always leave behind a legacy, a mental line.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like the tide when it goes up, goes down again, it leaves a line on docks. Well, the line is the tax. So over 2 months, my concern is that you would see restaurant operators or retailers increase prices very subtly,
Oh.
over 2 months. And then when taxes come back, it'll be applied to higher prices. That's exactly what happened in 2006 and 2008 when Harper cut the GST twice by 1%. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
1%. So what happened the first couple of months is that inflation went up, not sideways or down. Inflation
Hmm.
went up because retailers went after that 1% that was left behind by the GST cut.
Hmm.
So that's my concern. And what I've said to Senate and Mr. Dodger also agreed is that I think if you are to play around with the GST, make the cut permanent so you don't allow opportunity pricing to occur.
I'd add one thing when it talks about the GST holiday on restaurant meals. Again, it's back to my point. Not a lot of people on lower and struggling financially, which I think you can put it between 30% significant struggles financially, up to 50% who are changing their lifestyle, 53% the last poll I saw. But my point is, I don't think they're choosing which restaurant to go at night to.
No.
I think we'll go
Yeah,
here this time. So
exactly. Yeah.
again, for lower income people, I think there's zero savings there, probably. I mean, I'm obviously we'll have to
Because they
see.
don't go out. Absolutely. Yeah, I
Yeah, they
think you're
don't
right,
go out.
Mike. They don't go out. I mean, they may actually save, I don't know, 10 cents or 15 cents off a
Yeah.
cup of coffee, maybe.
Yes. Right.
But that's about it. But most people who are careful with their money since they don't have any money, they won't go out. So, yeah, it was really just not good policy. It's just bad fiscal policy. And my concern is that Canadians could actually pay for it for a very long time after we're done here.
Well, as my editorial said, long since we've forgotten the name of Ms. Freeland and probably even to some degree Trudeau, the interest on those what we're ringing up here is going to be with us. It's going to be with your children and their children and et cetera. So I'm just sad that the focus isn't more on that side of the coin as opposed to the political drama that's playing out in front of us. But let
Yep.
me ask you about, okay, so Trump tariffs are in the news. We alluded to that a few minutes ago.
Yep.
You've had things to say about our supply management system. which also adds to the cost. I mean, the Dairy Commission sets the prices for milk and other things. I'm just asking your take on it as someone who works in this. Do you think
So
that could be used as a trade chip? Like if we said, we'll eliminate supply management despite, Quebec's opposition, but in return, we don't want these other tariffs.
yeah, so it's interesting. So I actually went to Senate twice this fall. Once was for the GST holiday a couple of weeks
Mm-hmm.
ago, but the other time was about 7 weeks ago about Bill C-282, which would actually exempt the SM5 from any new
Mm-hmm.
trade deals or future trade deals, including the next round with the United States and Mexico. And what I've said to senators is that, well, first of all, try to understand what you're trying to defend here, because it is not a perfect policy.
Yeah.
And over the years, I've actually showed Canadians some of the blind spots related to the policy. It's an important policy, and I'm not advocating to abolish supply management personally. I'm not in Bernier's camp here, but I do recognize that the policy itself is far from being perfect. So that's one thing I made quite clear to senators. The other thing, if you are to adopt Bill C-282, you're basically putting a huge target on the SM5 for Mr. Trump to use. It's
Yes.
going to make it even worse. He's interested in market access. He is not going to care whether or not we want to protect supply
Mm-hmm.
management. He doesn't care about supply management. All he wants is market access. And that's the language he wants to talk about. So I think that Bill C-282 is a mistake because it actually it doesn't allow Canadians to think differently about supply management. It doesn't force the government to optimize supply management. It just protects what I consider to be a very weak policy right now.
The bottom line, does it cost Canadian consumers the way it's currently constituted?
It's a lot of people say that it does. I'm of the mind that it depends, because if you compare, say, with the U.S., where prices are much more volatile. Remember my argument about volatility
Mm-hmm.
earlier?
Yes.
Okay, so if you don't have supply management in Canada, you will see more volatile prices in Canada. Now,
Interesting.
over time, you could see lower prices. But do you want this or
Mm-hmm.
this?
Yeah.
That's the question. That's the real question. And so my guess is that Canadians want domestic production in Canada, but we're just north of a superpower called the United States. So if you want domestic production in Canada, I think our job is to make that domestic production as competitive as possible. And right now, we're getting the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me finish with this, because you've been in the hot seat recently because you talked about the carbon tax. You didn't have to say anything, by the way. You just had to put the two words out there because it's highly politicized now. But you commissioned or were part, and released some studies, peer-reviewed, that showed that the
Peer
carbon
reviewed
tax,
and published.
yeah,
Yes, thank
yeah,
you.
that
Hey,
added,
thank you for noticing.
yes, but added to the cost, of food, the carbon tax, to the food, the whole processing there. Alternative study out of the University of Calgary says it's not that big a deal. What's the main bone of contention there? Why is there that disagreement? I have a quick opinion on it. That one thing I can guarantee is the carbon tax didn't lower the price of anything. So,
No, but what I'm arguing is that, my area of expertise is food distribution and policy. So I
mm-hmm.
can tell you, Mike, based on the research we've done, you cannot correlate the carbon price or the carbon tax policy with retail prices. You know why? And as a consumer, you'll understand why. A lot of things can impact retail prices. The
Yes,
weather can impact retail prices. Our behavior can impact retail promotions, loss leaders, you
yes,
name it. It can all distort prices of retail, and it has nothing to do with the carbon tax. So based on our research we've done, we've actually came to the conclusion that you cannot do that. And economists at the University of Calgary, which are funded by ECCC, by the way, we should say, and
mm-hmm.
one of the authors is actually paid by Environment and Climate Change Canada on top of that. Now, they're advocating that the carbon tax is not impacting food prices. Well, you can't say that. Our job, our work has been on the supply chain. And what we've noticed since 2019 is that the agri-food sector in Canada, likely as a result of the implementation of the carbon tax, has become less competitive than the United States. Wholesale, not retail, wholesale food prices in Canada has increased by almost 40% more than the US,
Mm.
which means that grocers out there like Loblaws and Sobeys and Metro and Walmart and Costco are likely not going to be as interested in buying Canadian food versus American goods despite the dollar. And that's our biggest concern, because over time, if you hurt the competitiveness of the sector, you will
Yes.
eventually make this a food security issue and a food affordability issue. And prices will be impacted as a
Yes.
result.
Well, it's been, it's fascinating. That's why I recommend people go to the Food Professor at Food Professor, on X, because you're constantly giving me an update on all sorts of stuff that's coming down the pike in different parts of the country too, which I find very valuable. It's easy to get a little localized when you're looking at things,
That's
and to
right.
get that sort of national
It's important
perspective.
to, when you look at food system, it's important not to be too linear. And
Hmm.
and and going back to the economists at Calgary, that's what they do. They actually make this so simple and linear. You miss out on the broader issue. You miss out on all of the moving parts that
Yeah.
actually makes our life different.
Yeah. And makes our life different for the most important category that any of us purchase, and
Yeah,
a category that we
exactly.
started out saying has gone up dramatically. And yes, I agree that wages I think they're finally back to pre-pandemic levels, but boy, food prices have outstripped that. And as I say, at the lower end of the income scale, as you measure with your food insecurity, it's been problematic. So I think it's
What
important.
concerns me right now, and we've seen this over the last 9 years. We haven't seen a government in Ottawa um, concerned about competitiveness at
Mhm.
all. It's
No,
the opposite that we've seen. It seems as though Ottawa is only concerned about retail politics,
yeah.
and that's not what we need.
No, I think that's a very fair comment. And of course, you don't drop from 19th to or 15th to 19th in competitiveness, but because you paid attention to it. I mean, that's my big thing, is that they have different priorities. Economics, competitiveness, all of those things have not been a priority. And now, there's always consequences to political choices or policy choices. In the
Exactly.
meantime, look, I want you to go out. It's so kind of you to find time for us. Christmas is coming. The family's waiting for you. Please know we appreciate it. And secondly, thanks so much for taking the time. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.